Everyone. Josh with Severe Weather. Happy Saturday to you. We are tracking Lee as it becomes extra tropical and continues to plow forward here towards eastern New England and especially the Canadian Maritime provinces, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, eventually Newfoundland as well. We are also going to talk about a new depression in the Atlantic and how that could impact Bermuda next week. Another storm still out there that we're dealing with, Margot, that is kind of getting into its last legs. And then potentially a couple other areas that we're going to be watching later next week for tropical development. So things are very busy here, and let's get right to it. A busy next week. Now, not in the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean, certainly, but over the open Atlantic. You can see Lee here, a very large storm expected to move into western Nova Scotia and then New Brunswick here this afternoon into tonight. And we're going to talk some details on that. It is losing its tropical characteristics, now classified post-tropical. That actually happened with Hurricane Sandy. It technically became post-tropical before coming on shore, but that did not lessen the size or the impacts of the storm. So do keep that in mind. It's just a classification at this point. We also have Tropical Storm Margot, which is going to slowly weaken and make a right turn towards the Azores. We've got a new depression, which is predicted to turn northwest, and it may put Bermuda on alert here towards the middle of next week. I'll show you forecasts that are at least trending in a more favorable direction for Bermuda, a little bit more to your right, which is good. And then we've got another area set to come off of Africa that many models are showing development with later next week. The next name on the list would be Ophelia, which was actually used, I believe, 6 years ago, back in 2017, which was the year of Irma and Maria. We did have Ophelia that year. And then yet to form is an area I'm going to be watching for you guys later next weekend. We do see on models that there's going to be a front hanging out into some warm waters and maybe some slow development into some form of a tropical or subtropical system here next weekend, which if you are planning a beach weekend next weekend, you're going to want to keep a very close eye on. Whether or not it develops, it certainly could make the weather very much unpleasant. So we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. Lee has the X. It's now post-tropical. It still has maximum sustained winds of 80 miles per hour, moving quickly north at 25 miles per hour. And we're expecting landfall here early this afternoon over southwestern Nova Scotia, and then a second landfall over southern New Brunswick this evening. We do have Tropical Storm Margot. Winds are 60 miles per hour. That system is making a clockwise loop and will turn back to the right, heading towards the Azores and losing tropical characteristics. We have Tropical Depression 15, which was formed yesterday from our last invest, and that should be our next tropical storm, Nigel, that is expected to move to the northwest here at about 14 to 15 miles per hour. So we're going to have to watch that in Bermuda in a few days. And then yet to form is a wave that is expected to move off the west coast of Africa towards the middle of next week, and will be in an area where it could develop into our next tropical storm, which would be Ophelia, probably in about 5 to 6 days, give or take. So that's the next one that we have to keep an eye on, especially if you're in the Caribbean and Bermuda. Not shown on the map because it's not yet an entity, is something that I think could try to spin up here off the southeast coast, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself at this point. So here you can see in the tropics, very quiet in the Gulf, very quiet in the Caribbean, really just 3 systems on the map to keep an eye on. Here is Lee, which is a very large storm. And I think fortunately here in Massachusetts and the islands, the storm is just a little bit to the right of where it looked like it was going to be a couple days ago. And that is sparing you guys the worst of the wind and rain. I'm still hearing of power outages though around Cape Cod. So obviously it's a strong enough storm, but you can see the center right here underneath this cloud canopy is getting very close to Nova Scotia. And it's going to come right into the Bay of Fundy this evening and then into New Brunswick and turn right towards Prince Edward Island and Newfoundland here over the second half of the weekend. This is Tropical Storm Margot. It is actually moving to the southeast and is going to make a loop back in this direction here as it runs into high pressure and then gets picked up. We do have an upper level low in here, partially associated with the remains of Katia. It's still out there. And that is actually drawing our next Tropical Depression 15 more to the northwest. This upper low has gotten pushed southwestward by this area of high pressure, which sits in between the storms, allowing them to keep their distance from each other. What it's doing is it's pushing this upper level low down here, and that is allowing Tropical Depression 15, instead of going west towards the islands, to track more towards the northwest. Now, Bermuda's right here, and I'm sorry I got so much on the map here. Let me, I don't know if I can really do a whole lot with zoom here, but let me highlight the center here. This is Bermuda, And we've got this little upper low, which is allowing this system to kind of turn more in this direction. It may come back this way before making a hard right. We still have to watch it in Bermuda. There's a possibility this could try to get a little closer, but right now the trend is a lot more favorable. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about that here in just a minute. Here's a look at the upper level situation here across the Atlantic. And this is just showing you what I showed you before, but you can see more of that upper level low here. It's a small player on the field, but it's a big one for you in Bermuda. It's certainly giving you some breathing room here from the upcoming system that I think you may get. And then looking into the Eastern Atlantic, a lot of northwest flow aloft, providing some subsidence, some dry air in place. You can kind of see that right in here, a bit of a trough in this direction here. And that is providing wind shear and also bringing some drier air down into the Eastern Atlantic. So behind 15 over here, we do get a break, and then our next wave is set to move offshore here in about 4 days. That will take a little bit of time to develop, but I think once it gets a little bit farther west into this area, so the wave over here, once it gets to about here, does have a chance to develop towards next weekend. After that, I'm seeing some shift to the right again, but we still need to keep an eye on things in the islands just in case. But that's, again, 10 days or more away at this point. Let's look at Lee. You can see it is now post-tropical, but still a Category 1 storm with 80-mile-per-hour winds. The pressure slowly coming up. Planes have been in there, seeing the wind field continuing to expand. So the strongest winds right now are showing up east of the center, and those would be aimed at areas like Halifax and just down the coast from you. We do have an area of strong winds on the west side that could impact parts of eastern Maine here later this morning into New Brunswick, but it will be weakening. So these large winds, large areas of winds are going to slowly kind of succumb to that colder water. And as a result, the strongest winds are actually going to be over water for the next few hours, and then they'll slowly dissipate. But still, the storm is moving quickly and beginning a right turn, so it's going to move over more populated areas. So even though it's dissipating, I say dissipate, it's weakening. It is still providing a lot of rough surf, a lot of storm surge, and certainly a lot of wind and rain to this entire region. It's very rare we see a storm this big encompassing such a large area of the maritime provinces, but that's what we're dealing with. But fortunately, because of the colder waters off the coast here, it is going to be continuing to weaken. You can see the hurricane force winds here are still aimed at Yarmouth and southwestern Nova Scotia. We do have hurricane watches from north of Yarmouth around the bend here to the central coast of Nova Scotia. That does include Halifax. We also have a hurricane watch from the Maine and New Brunswick border over to just southwest of St. John. As this system comes through over the Bay of Fundy, there's going to be an area of some stronger winds that could get close to hurricane force. Fortunately, in eastern Cape Cod, because the system is a little bit more to the east of where it looked like it could be a couple of days ago, we're just going to stay below that hurricane intensity. So tropical storm watch is still in effect for the islands, the Cape, right up through the Maine and New Hampshire seacoast, all the way around the Bay of Fundy, all the way around almost to Cape Breton here in Nova Scotia. And we do also have a tropical storm warning just east of Moncton here over the southeast coast of New Brunswick, and tropical storm watches for Prince Edward Island, for the rest of New Brunswick. I don't remember the name of this island here in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. I don't think it's very populated. And of course, for Cape Breton here, all the way to the Cabot Strait. So definitely a large area to see under such a big area of watches and warnings. You can see the wind field here in the red. The hurricane force winds are still happening here, mainly on the eastern side of our storm. Tropical storm force winds affecting all of eastern New England, southern New Brunswick, the majority of Nova Scotia, now even sneaking up into PEI. And of course, Cape Sable and Sable Island. And Bermuda is done with the tropical storm conditions for the time being. Here's when our strongest winds are expected to arrive. They're currently already making their way onshore here, the Maritimes and southeastern Maine. They'll continue into the afternoon into northern parts of Maine, into much of New Brunswick and the rest of Nova Scotia by this afternoon. PEI starting to get those tropical storm force winds here by late morning and continuing into the afternoon. And then the Gaspé Peninsula all the way over to almost Newfoundland by tonight. We'll see tropical storm force winds. The area starts shrinking a bit as our storm weakens, but nonetheless, this is still a very large area of places that could have power outages due to the strength and the speed of this storm. Here's your tropical storm probabilities, and pretty much a slam dunk over down East Maine, over New Brunswick, over Nova Scotia, and over PEI, with lesser probabilities anyway as this storm begins to weaken some more. It will probably be below tropical storm strength by the time it's moving onshore. southwestern parts of Nova Scotia, but it's going to be close to that. So certainly we've got that possibility. And here's a look at the hurricane wind speed probability. You can see it's very quickly tailing off down to only about 20% here, just south of Yarmouth, over to the southwestern tip of the coast here. We're not expecting hurricane force winds in Halifax, but gusts could get a little bit close to that at this point. Waves are going to be very high here, especially off the Nova Scotia coastline. We see wave heights over 40 feet, diminishing slowly to about 35 feet by this afternoon and below 30 feet. Doesn't show the Bay of Fundy, but we could have a bit of what's called a seiche, where the water gets driven very quickly up there and then very quickly empties out with the return flow. And I would definitely watch that if you are on the western coast of Nova Scotia. That could produce some very hazardous marine conditions here on the coastline. The good news for us here in coastal New England is these waves are coming down below 20 feet and staying primarily offshore. But the sea was angry, my friends, like an old man trying to return soup to the deli. Tell me if you know what that show's from. But anyway, we are going to continue to see this storm weakening, fortunately. Some gales are going to form here over the weekend and really early next week off the mid-Atlantic coast. There's a front coming through, which will intensify. And then we keep our eyes here to the southeast on what I think will be Hurricane Nigel, and that could bring some pretty rough surf east of Bermuda. We could see 10 to 15 foot waves on Bermuda and waves as high as 30 to 35 feet by Wednesday morning to the east of Bermuda. And that is going to fortunately avoid Canada, it looks like. And then we're going to talk about the southeast coast here for next weekend. Things could get very unsettled there as well, with low pressure expected to form over the northern Bahamas and just east of Florida. Here's the GFS showing we have a strong ridge of high pressure here over Newfoundland and Labrador. Here is our storm that is getting pushed northward by our approaching trough from the west. The colder colors are lower heights, lower temperatures aloft, showing a trough. And that trough is going to be moving into the eastern United States here at the end of the weekend, producing some heavy rain over parts of the mid-Atlantic and Carolinas here later tomorrow, bringing another shot of cooler air with it. But it's going to be unsettled here early next week over the eastern United States. Then that trough lifts away to the north and east. And because that trough is a little bit slower, it is breaking down the ridge of high pressure to the northeast of Bermuda and allowing our next system, this is future Nigel, to take more of a curve. So very much, I'm not going to say fish storm because it's still getting close to Bermuda, but very much a recurving storm, which it could be a major hurricane, but it's going to stay away from land and then make a hard right and not impact the Atlantic Maritimes. So some better news for you guys here in that a few days ago, we showed that trough being slower and less intense. Now we're showing a deeper trough digging in and allowing that storm to recurve more quickly. We do have a trough split, though, here off the southeast coast, and we need to keep an eye next Friday and Saturday on potential development here. I don't know if the GFS is going to be right. It seems to be very aggressive here, but certainly there could be low pressure out here, and it could try to gain some tropical characteristics by next Saturday or Sunday and impact the Carolinas into early next week. But boy, look at this setup here. We've got such a strong ridge of high pressure back over the eastern United States here by the week after next. And that is going to protect us in the east from anything tropical by the time we get past about the 25th or so of September. It's also going to mean warmer temperatures are going to return. Here's a look at Lee, and you can see it does not have the look of a hurricane anymore. It looks almost like a nor'easter, kind of taking that shape here, but all of the really heavy rain is going to set up north of the center and very quickly advance east. Behind the center, things are going to very quickly improve. You'll still have rough surf and wind, but you aren't going to have any rain. And then that's it. It just heads into the trades of the northern Atlantic. Actually could merge with low pressure here and get ready to batter the British Isles by next Wednesday. Here's a look at the surface forecast. You can see winds are beginning to diminish here. This is from tropicaltidbits.com. Still some potentially hurricane force winds off of the coast of Nova Scotia later this morning, but look how quickly things die down. And you can see much lighter amounts of wind over the Bay of Fundy. You've got kind of an easterly fetch here, and you've got a northwesterly fetch, which could hit Yarmouth pretty hard, but the strongest winds remain well over the water, and they're kind of getting pulled away from the main seacoast back over the water here. Really, the strongest winds today are expected to hit places like Halifax and just down the coast from Halifax due to the slightly warmer waters there and the structure of the storm. The pressures very quickly come up. And this is very fortunate because it certainly could have been worse with a slower storm system, one that produced a longer period of rough weather. But fortunately, things are speeding up here. And this is going to be a quick hitting storm, but also one that quickly leaves the area by the end of the weekend. Here's a look at expected wind gusts, and you can see gusts are going to approach 60 miles per hour here on the Maine seacoast, maybe 50 to 60 in Acadia National Park, Bar Harbor, and close to 55 miles per hour around Eastport, Maine. You can see very strong winds are going to remain off the coast. We could have a few gusts this morning, though, as high as 60 miles per hour in Provincetown, as high as 52 or 53 around Plymouth, but Boston kind of avoids the really strong winds. It'll get windy. You could see sporadic power outages this morning in Boston, but I think the bulk of the strong wind does remain off the coast, very fortunately for us here. Taking a look at kilometers per hour for those of you in Canada here, we are looking at some stronger winds surging onto the coast here around 10:30 this morning. And then we see our strongest winds in Halifax early this afternoon, right after lunchtime, 90 kilometers per hour possible. Yarmouth, 80 to 90 kilometers possible, and 80 kilometers per hour possible across New Brunswick and down East Maine here. And over Prince Edward Island, we could see gusts in Charlottetown here around 75 kilometers per hour here as soon as 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So really the next few hours are going to see the strongest wind, and then things are going to very slowly improve after that. Our radar here out of Gray, Maine shows bands of rain pushing back to the west. Looking into Canada, we see some pretty nasty rain starting to move into the Halifax area, and certainly some strong winds and rain over the southwestern portion of Nova Scotia. And we're also starting to see some pretty nasty amounts of rain pushing through Charlottetown and Summerside here at PEI, Moncton, Miramichi, and even all the way up into northeastern New Brunswick, getting those bands of rain. So a lot of the business from the storm is on the northwest side of it. As the storm kind of tracks in this direction and here, and then moves out this way, you're going to see a lot of the nasty rain kind of on the western side here, as we have kind of what it's called a baroclinic setup, where the dropping of pressures is actually due to the approaching jet stream, not due to tropical processes. That would be barotropic. That's my scientific word for you guys for the day here. So that's what we're watching. Looking at radar Omega here, just looking at kind of the predicted GFS I would show you the NAM, but it doesn't go out into Canada very well. So it's an American model, but taking a look here at the GFS, you can see all that heavy rain moves up and then away. And we see an approaching front moving through the eastern U.S. here. This would be tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow evening, actually 2 in the morning here tomorrow night. Some rough weather across eastern North Carolina and some more rain moving into New England. So enjoy the weather today, New England. It's going to be a windy day, but we're going to see things pulling away pretty quickly, and it should be a nice crisp night for the night tonight. So yeah, interesting weather. Precipitation forecast looks still pretty heavy over eastern Maine, but really confined to just the southeastern tip of Maine, where amounts could get as high as 2.5 to 3.5 inches. Same goes for New Brunswick. When you get back to Portland and down to Plymouth, we're seeing amounts less than a ½ inch of rain. Cape Cod, maybe an inch, but there's a very sharp kind of cutoff between where the rain's going to be fairly light and where it's really going to come down hard. Taking a look here at Atlantic Canada, and these are millimeters, and we see amounts in eastern Maine getting up to 60 to 70 millimeters. Nova Scotia, amounts of 50 to 60 millimeters here through the night tonight, and then very heavy rain cutting right across the central part of New Brunswick into the eastern Gaspé Peninsula, and we see amounts that may get as high as 100 millimeters of rain. So we could have some flooding issues here, but it is going to be a quickly moving storm. So fortunately, those amounts are going to get held down somewhat. Now, taking a look at the central Atlantic, here is our next system, Tropical Depression 15. You can see it's got a very large size to it already, but it is still starting to form a core. And until it does that, it's not going to strengthen very quickly. But it will be in a favorable spot here to develop into a hurricane in a couple of days. We could still have rapid intensification. Here is a look at Tropical Storm Margot kind of moving southeast, and that will do a loop here and push back and around to the east here in just a couple of days. The visible shows that it's getting a lot of wind shear from the north, so it's kind of getting compressed from the top, but it is going to make a turn and eventually weaken. And you can see we're at 60 mile per hour winds right now, but expecting it to be down to 40 by the end of the weekend, and a remnant low. It could try to re-strengthen here a little bit, but it's just going to be a remnant low moving into the Azores here by the middle of next week. Behind 15, we do have a little bit of a disturbance, not looking too impressive, and then we've got another blow up here over Western Africa and another wave behind it. The timing on these two is still a bit uncertain, but looking like they're going to evolve gradually towards the second part of next week near or south of the Cabo Verde Islands, the Cape Verde Islands. Here's another look at 15, and you can see some wind shear coming in from the southeast. That is pushing most of the storms off to the north and west of the center. It's a healthy looking outflow, but it's still missing the core that it really needs to develop. So until that happens, we're not going to see rapid intensification. I do think that does start happening probably later tomorrow and more likely on Monday, and we could see this becoming a hurricane very quickly, with the next name on the list being Nigel. Now, the models are a little bit weaker on that intensification, but they still show it happening, especially on Monday and Tuesday of next week. We could still have a Category 3 hurricane, although the official forecast has dropped down just a touch into high Category 2. Either way, it's going to be a powerful storm. You can see, though, the shift in the track a little bit more to the right here in the short term. It's part of the reason the storm is not going to strengthen as quickly as originally expected, because the highest water content of warmer waters here is a little bit south and west of that new track. So it kind of misses the real meat of that. It still does go over warm waters and still does have a great chance of developing into a strong hurricane, perhaps a Category 3. But the fortunate thing for us here in Bermuda is we've had so many storms that the water temperatures surrounding Bermuda have now cooled down, and that's taken away the available fuel and hot water for this storm to maintain major hurricane intensity by the time it gets up past 30 north. So we are going to wave goodbye to it here in Bermuda, but still keep an eye on it. It could still go a little bit further west. Fortunately, though, this trend is more of a favorable trend here for Bermuda. You kind of see this little dot on my screen here, and none of the models really goes within 200 miles of Bermuda. So a couple days ago, they showed it right over the island, and now they've shifted east. A few ensembles on the western side of this envelope are still very close to or over Bermuda, but the majority of the European ensemble guidance, the mean and the operational, all stay about 250 miles to the right of it. So that would be encouraging news, but certainly still some fringe effects, including some very rough surf and possibly strong winds coming to Bermuda by Wednesday and Wednesday night. Here's the European control, and you can see why this system is starting to turn a little bit more to the north and west. This area of high pressure is a little bit stronger. It's influenced Margot to actually lift this system north, and the weakness between these two ridges is a little bit too strong for this system to continue on a westerly track. So that is very good news for Bermuda, but we are still going to see a quickly strengthening storm here Monday night, Tuesday into Tuesday night before we hit cooler waters. Beyond this storm, we do see our next wave trying to develop next weekend, and we also see lowering pressures here near Florida, and especially on the Atlantic side of Florida. So we do have to keep an eye on that area as well. The next system here would be Ophelia. The models are not quite as strong with it, and you can see it's going to be tracking very close to where Lee tracked, but making more of a hard right according to the European ensemble control. The GFS model is starting to believe that a little bit more as well. You can see the GFS. So Lee is all the way up here by Tuesday. This is a non-tropical low. This is still Margot, which is starting to still kind of hang on in there a little bit. And then here's likely Category 2 hurricane Nigel by the time we get here into Tuesday night and Wednesday, making that turn away from Canada. Behind that, the GFS is, at least at this point, is struggling to develop the next wave. It is jumping on this area here off of the Atlantic coast here on Saturday morning. And I don't think this particular solution is going to be the one that's going to happen, but I definitely think there could be something down there later next weekend. So we do need to keep an eye on it at this point. The GFS starts to just start developing everything down in here, and that's probably going to be too aggressive. But it does not really develop this system. It may have a brief tropical storm, Ophelia, but the model run before it was a little bit... maybe it wasn't that aggressive with it. I think it was the model run before that. Yeah, it's kind of just backed off on this next wave, trying to become a tropical storm. Oh, here it is. It does have something east of the islands here next Thursday and then turning away and weakening. It's trying to develop everything down in here. I don't know if that's going to happen. A look at the GFS shows that this system could wrap up pretty quickly north of the Bahamas, east of the Space Coast and Treasure Coast of Florida here late Friday night, early Saturday morning. It really gets deep with this system. I don't think that GFS has necessarily the best handle on something like this, but we saw something like this happen back around Memorial Day weekend, so it doesn't take a lot to get a system to spin up quickly in here. So just keep an eye on it at this point. We're not predicting a hurricane hitting South Carolina, but it very much could be a wet system here by Saturday night into Sunday and early Monday as well. You can see the predicted winds on the GFS. It really goes to town here with wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour by Sunday morning off the southeast coast, and even up to about 60 to 70 miles per hour near Charleston and up to Georgetown and maybe even up to Myrtle Beach. But I mean, that's just one model run at this point. I would not get too carried away with it. It's got something here in the Bay of Campeche as well. But just a sign that even though everything's been out over the open Atlantic for the most part, we are not necessarily finished here in the southeastern United States. We still have several more weeks of hurricane season to go. Going to be pretty wet here tomorrow into Monday over the eastern Carolinas. Florida is going to stay pretty wet. Then we dry out. Then we've got our front hanging out in here, and we see lots of moisture building back up near the Bahamas. Pressure is lowering, and it could get very wet here by the weekend over eastern Florida and over the southeast. Tough to say exactly where things are going to form and go, but you see there's some pretty significant potential for heavy amounts of rain over the Carolinas, maybe Georgia and Florida, with this particular model showing 6 inches of rain in places like Charleston and Somerville. So we have to keep an eye on that, but still way too soon to make any calls. All right, please be safe if you're in Eastern Maine and Atlantic Canada. I really hope you guys keep your power on, that you have minimal damage. It's a big storm, but it is fortunately weakening. I really do appreciate your time. Thank you today for your views. Thank you for your support. And if you have not yet subscribed, I encourage you, if you feel led to subscribe here. I'm going to take tomorrow off, and we'll talk again on Monday morning. And we do have a membership channel as well. If you feel led to spend a little bit of money, just 33 cents a day to help support me. As we get through the worst part of hurricane season, I'll be giving you guys a little bit more attention. It's a little busy right now, as you can imagine, but I really appreciate your time. I thank you, and I give all the glory to God, who has allowed me the gift to be able to do this for you all on YouTube. I really think I've been blessed in many ways. I've been called to prepare weather forecasts to help you guys be prepared for the future and do my very best. I feel like I've done a good job. We could always do better. I mean, we're not God. But certainly he gives us the ability to believe in him and to believe he's got big things coming. And, you know, God has commanded me to be a bold person. Joshua 1:9 says, "Have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. For the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest." Whether or not you believe in God, whether or not you believe Jesus is our risen Savior, please know that we've all been created by God. You have the choice to believe in him. You don't have to. I've chosen to, and I feel like that's given me the courage to do what I can rather than going with the status quo and staying in a spot of uncertainty. I've been able to just have some faith out there, just say, look, there's something out there, a higher power that is giving me many, many blessings. And all I got to do is just latch on to the faith that of what is not seen, but what I believe, and to be strong and to be courageous in whatever I do, to take some risks here, to be kind of an entrepreneur, if you think about it that way, but to continue to go out and not be fearful of what may happen, because fear is just false evidence appearing real. It's a down payment on something that may not even happen. To try not to be dismayed, to know that the Lord lifts us up no matter what we do. And that's just all I wanted to say this morning. I mean, I want to pray for you all. Obviously, I think prayer is powerful. Whether or not you believe that it works, I certainly do. And it gives me the ability to connect with people like you that I may not even personally know, but I still feel like we're connected in the kingdom. And I want to pray for you. And if you could pray for me as well, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to accept those prayers, I should say. So please, if you feel led to, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll be happy to pray for you. Have a great Saturday, everyone. God bless you. See you on Monday.